Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Creating a Winning Round 2 MBA Application Strategy. My name is Nelly, and I'll be the moderator of the event. And I'm here with a very special guest, Ellin Lolis, who is a leading MBA consultant and the founder and president of Ellin Lolis Consulting. Before giving the word to her, I want to tell you that you can ask questions anytime during the webinar just using the chat, and all questions are welcome, so then don't hesitate. I think everything is set now, and I'm giving the word to you, Ellin.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and thank you so much for having me. It's always really fun to do these with you guys. So, as Nelly mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit today about setting up your round two strategy. We have about 2 months left, actually a little less. So, thinking about how to get all of that ready if you're just starting right now. So what are some of the best practices that you can follow? What are tips to make sure that you're as successful as possible? So I guess we'll jump right in. So just to introduce myself, I'm Ellin. I'm the founder of Ellin Lolis Consulting. We work with clients from all over the world with all different kinds of MBA programs. We're mostly focused on top 10 in the US and Europe, but we do occasionally work with programs all over. That's a little bit about me. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So the first thing that we want to talk about today when we're thinking about a successful round two strategy is how to develop a strong application strategy overall. So just because you might be in a little bit of a rush doesn't mean that you should skip the part of really stopping to think about your foundations and your fundamentals. So there's a couple of different steps that we want to think about here when looking into that. So the first thing is that we don't want to skip building a personal brand. So a lot of people, especially if they're in a little bit of a hurry, they'll just open up the school website, look at the essays, start writing their essays, maybe ask a bunch of people if they can write them a letter of recommendation and just kind of go from there. So that can be a big mistake. So really you want to kind of sit down first and think strategically about how you're going to present yourself to the schools. And the way that we recommend doing this is by creating a personal brand. So the word personal brand can kind of be a little intimidating to people sometimes, but really what it means is thinking about what kind of profile are you presenting to the admissions committee. So what are your strengths and weaknesses as an application? What are your superstar moments? And how can you kind of condense that into a solid positioning? So are you someone who is, working to drive financial innovation for small and medium businesses? Are you, somebody who is about healthcare? Are you somebody who's excited about digital transformation? There's so many different angles that you can kind of pursue. So you really want to think, okay, what is my position? How can I show what my role would be in the class? Because if you try to say, I'm a little bit of everything, it can be a little bit difficult to understand what kind of value you'll bring to the class and how you can contribute overall to the class. Because of course, when we're looking at who to admit, it's not just people who have good GMAT scores, good, academic records, strong employment histories, because there's way more people who have strong statistics than there are spots in an MBA program. So we're looking at other things as well. How do we develop a diverse class in terms of, diverse gender breakdown, diverse international presence, lots of different industries. So showing them clearly what you can bring to the table and what position you have is really important. During this process, you also want to think, what are some of my best stories? So this is a great place to already sort through those. So when you're thinking about stories, you want to always use that kind of STAR methodology. So situation, task, action, result. To think about blocks of content that you can use in your essay to share who you are with the admissions committee. Our brains are wired for stories. It's the best way to get to know someone. If you meet a new friend, what do you start doing? You start trading stories about your life. That's how you get to know people. MBA applications are really no different. That's a good way for us to get to know you. So you really want to start to think, what are my 4, 5, 6 best stories? A story is something that needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you don't want to look at things like, I took the SAT and I got into college. That's not really a story. That's more of an accomplishment or a bullet point on your CV. A story would maybe be, I came from a really low income background. I was a first generation college student, and I had to fight against the odds. I got a scholarship to this school, and I took, the bus 2 days or 2 hours every day there, studied after school, worked 3 jobs, and then took the bus 2 hours every day home. I finally got admitted into the, my dream school, and it changed my life. That's a story. So, I mean, you don't have to have that particular story, of course, but those are things that you want to start to think about, these blocks of text or of content that you can utilize in your application. You also want to think about maybe in your personal brand, what are some of your weaknesses? So do you maybe have poor grades in college, and thinking about how can I counterbalance that in my, recommendation letters, writing an optional essay. Of course, a good GMAT score or GRE score is going to be really helpful there. So the personal brand is also a way that you can be really self-aware and analyze maybe some weaknesses that you need to counterbalance at some point in your application. You also want to make sure that you have clear goals. Clear goals in your application mean that you have a strong application. An MBA is a professional degree, right? It's something that you're using to advance your career. Unlike, other degrees, academic degrees, where maybe you're doing research, or you're going to go into academia. An MBA is there so that you can build skills and network to then get a higher job or switch industries or switch geographies. So having a really clear career direction and career vision is very important. And you want to make sure that that's clear in an essay. Presenting an application that says, I want to go to business school to discover what I want to do, you're probably not going to make it, even if you have great statistics. There's schools that are a little bit more open-ended. Stanford, for example, you don't need to know exactly what you want to do, but you should have a general direction, right? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to, stay in finance? Do you want to transition to tech? Do you want to do something with education? You should at least have kind of a big picture idea for those schools that let you have a little more leeway. Even then, ideally, you'd have a very clear focus of what you want to do. That's especially important in the short term. Your short-term goals, those are going to be what you pursue immediately after the MBA. So we're talking 2, maybe 3 years from now. That's exactly, kind of what you'll be doing very short term, who you're going to start recruiting for, your summer internship. So this is something that the schools want to see. It's a plan that makes sense and that you've already thought about. Because really kind of from day one, once you get into the program, you're going to need to start kind of thinking about recruitment and networking. So if it's something that you want to discover in the MBA, that can be problematic. Of course, there's always room for you to explore different ideas and change your mind. And a lot of people change their mind, but it's important in your application to show focus. In the long term, you don't have to have the perfect business plan for the startup that you want to start in 10 years. But you should, again, have a pretty clear vision. I want to go into consulting because then I want to take a C-level role in a major pharma company, and consulting is going to help me in this way. Or I want to work in an ed tech for 2 years because then I want to come back to my country and found an ed tech. It's a really underdeveloped area in our country right now. So I want to learn best practices before then starting a startup to make sure it's more successful. So you want to make sure that you have that very clear long-term vision. It doesn't have to be quite as concrete as your short-term vision, but you do want to make sure that the relationship, again, between short and long-term is very clear. Finally, you want to choose and notify your recommenders ASAP. Recommenders are a really important part of the application process. It is our only, objective view of your profile. So these are people that are telling us about your strengths and weaknesses from a viewpoint that's not, of course, you telling us about yourself. Of course, you're self-aware, but it's nice to have an outsider's perspective. But on the other hand, they're doing a huge favor. They're really not getting anything out of this. And at the end of the year, it can be really tricky. A lot of people travel. There are a lot of end of year parties, end of year deliverables. So December can be a hectic month, and especially those last 2 weeks of December, it can be really hard to track people down. So if you wait and ask someone for a letter of recommendation on December 15th, if it were me, I would just say, I'm really sorry, I can't help you. A lot of recommenders say that too, like, I'm going on vacation with my family in a week, or, I have all these things to deliver and I'm really sorry. That's a pretty common answer, waiting pretty late. Or they say that they'll help you, but then they're really hard to get a hold of, or they don't write a great letter because they're in a rush. So if you haven't already talked to your recommenders, already think strategically, who are the people who can add value to my recommendation or to my application? Probably you want to make sure your direct boss is one of those people, and already sit down with them, explain the process, make sure they're on board, maybe provide them with your CV and a general overview of how you're going to present yourself in the application so that they can already get writing on your application. So don't wait. Even though the applications are technically in January, they're the 4th, 5th, and 6th, which is only 1 or 2 days after people get back into the office. And in some countries, they're not even in the office that week. A lot of countries come back the week after. So make sure you do that ASAP. Ideally, those could be in by, December 1st or even a little later, but that would be a good target. So second part, and this can be something that people struggle a lot with, is where should I apply? Should I apply to 20 different schools or just one? And which schools have better odds in round 2? So this can be something that a lot of strategy will make the difference between a successful application and a not so successful application. So there's a couple of different things that we want to consider. The first thing we want to think about is, regardless of everything else, you want to make sure that the schools you apply to are consistent with your goals and brand. So you always want to think, if it comes down to it and I only get into this school, will I go? And if the answer is no, don't apply. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. The application fee, of course, it's another $200, $250. So if you're not going to go in the end, don't waste your time, I would say. So of course, a lot of times people get into kind of panic mode and they apply. But really make sure that the schools that you apply for are going to help you reach the goals that you have. The next thing that you want to think about is the number of intakes. So for example, INSEAD, they have January intakes and they also have August intakes. So if you're applying right now, that is to start in August of 2023. But if you wait a little bit, you can start in January of 2024. So thinking about how to balance that, do I want to maybe apply for schools with only one intake now, and then maybe apply for some of those January intakes later, because they're not quite as my priority schools, or because they don't have enough time. So thinking a little bit about how to balance that, and maybe how to kind of schedule those out, can be an interesting factor to consider. It can also help you apply to more schools over a slightly larger period of time. However, a lot of those times you're going to hear your answers from one school significantly before you hear from another school. So, for example, if you applied to a US school in round 1 and you hear back from them in March, but you applied to, INSEAD round 2 in, late March, early April, you're only going to hear in June, at which point you'd already be starting, not classes, but you'd already be moving to the MBA program in the US. So you also want to make sure that those align, based on the kind of factors that you're looking for. But it can be a way to sometimes stagger things a little bit. Or, for example, okay, I'm thinking about applying to MIT. Their deadline is a little bit later. So I'm on the borderline. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but it's a little later, so I think I can fit it in. That can also be something to consider. The other thing is your risk appetite. So in terms of number of schools, if you have a lower risk appetite, you might want to apply to a larger number of schools. You're going to have a higher chance of getting in, right? Spreading your odds around a bit more. If you're okay with taking on a little more risk, you can apply to a smaller number of schools. The thing in round 2 is that, with those kind of January intakes aside, because that's a whole different pool, a whole different set of odds, round 3 for the US schools, it's possible. Harvard does not have a round 3, but most other schools do in the US. But the admissions rates are significantly lower, 1%, 2%, 3%. They take a very small number of people in those rounds. So we have clients every year who apply round 3, who are admitted round 3. But you want to keep that in mind, that it's not kind of a round one, round two situation where, maybe I'll apply to 3 schools round one, and if for some reason it doesn't work out, I'll apply to another 3 or 4 in round two. If you apply to maybe 2 schools in round two, then applying to 3 or 4 in round three, it's going to be a little bit trickier. So that's something to think about, is if you want to have a higher risk, okay, maybe apply for fewer schools. If you want to lower the risk, maybe apply to a few more, but never apply to a school that you wouldn't actually want to go to in the end, because it may be the only one you get into. The other thing to think about is age. So when you're thinking about the risk, so what some people will say is, okay, we're going to apply to 2 schools in round 2. Those are the 2 that I want. If for some reason it doesn't, or I don't have time for more than 2, if for some reason it doesn't work out, I'm going to apply in round 1 of next year. And that can be a perfectly valid strategy as well. But if you're getting a bit on in age, you're getting a bit older, maybe you're going to turn 30 next year, that's also something to think about. You might want to expand the number of schools you're applying to, because if you're on the older side of the applicant pool, the longer and longer you wait for, later and later years and admission cycles, generally the harder it's going to get. There's, of course, always exceptions to the rule. No 2 profiles are the same. But if you look at the averages, the average candidate generally for top 10 US schools has between 4 and 5 years of work experience. So, if you've already got 6 and next year you're going to have 7, it could be an interesting idea to maybe already add a few more schools now. And then, really think about quality over quantity. So even though maybe you're thinking, okay, I don't want to take a lot of risk, it's good to apply to 5 schools and do it really well, then apply to 10 schools and deliver very mediocre or poor quality applications. So put those in a list of priority, also looking at deadlines. So, applying to the schools that you like best with the earliest deadlines. And then if you have more time, start adding those other schools in. But it's better to send a smaller number of really good applications than to send a huge number of really poor applications. So keep that in mind. But I would say the average applicant that we work with applies generally to 4 to 5 schools in round 2, although sometimes that can go as high as 7. Really, again, depending on age, depending on risk, and things like that. Someone who would apply to 7 knows that those 7 schools are ones that they really, really like and would be happy to go to. And then the last thing that we'll talk about today is how to set up a successful timeline. So thinking about, okay, I have just under 2 months. What do I need to do? How can I break up my time? Applying to 5 schools in such a short amount of time is a lot, and it is, but you can make it happen. So here's the things that you want to do ASAP. Number 1, take your tests. If you haven't taken your tests already, you really don't want to put that off. Of course, if your mock test, you're still, getting a 600, for example, on the GMAT, and your target school looks for 700, 720. You might not want to take your attempt now, but you really want to push yourself to get that done soon. If you haven't taken the TOEFL and you need to take that, or the IELTS, you should already get that planned, and you should already start trying to take those soon. A lot of times, if you're going to take the in-person version of the test centers really sell out quickly of their the spots sell out quickly, and there's a lot of closures for the holidays as well in certain parts of the world. So make sure to plan ahead for that. And I would say already, if you're on the fence, should I not? My mocks are good, but I'm a little nervous. I would already try to give it a shot. Already select your schools. Make sure that you know which schools you're going to apply to. Get your plan together. How many letters, how many essays, what are the essay topics, what do I need to do, are there video essays, so that you know exactly what you need to do, and also those deadlines. And then also develop your personal brand. Here's my stories, here's how I'm going to present myself, here's the goals that I'm going to use. That way you can make sure your recommenders are on the same page. You can make sure that everything follows a really consistent and coherent narrative. And then over the next month, so I would say between now and December 1st, I would focus on these 5 things. The first thing would be to choose and contact your recommenders. So of course, it's important to be a little careful with who you contact, because you don't want to, ask 5 different people if they can write you a letter of recommendation and have to come back and say, I don't think that you're actually that interesting, or I don't think you're going to write a good letter. That can be a little awkward. So I would recommend only approaching people who you're sure you want to recommend you. And if for some reason they're not available, then maybe asking a backup option. But you want to ask them as soon as possible so that they have enough time to write. You have enough time to orient them about how you're going to present yourself. If they're going to write for multiple schools, they know all the questions that they need to answer. And then ideally, you can send them all of those links around the 1st of December, and they can already submit those, and everyone can take a deep breath of relief that's done. You also want to connect with the schools. Just because it's already November doesn't mean that they're not having webinars, doesn't mean that, student ambassadors are not connecting with students, doesn't mean that you can't utilize your network to talk to current students and alumni. It's something that's really important. If you haven't attended any webinars or events from the schools, you definitely want to make sure to do that. If you can swing a campus visit, that's great too. They don't expect you to travel internationally, but if you're close by, you could definitely do that. By the end of the month, they're really going to start going into exam mode. So I would say by December 1st, it's not really that worth visiting. Most people will be studying for exams. There won't be many classes. Club meetings will really wrap up. So if you want to visit, then this would be the month to do it. I would then begin writing your essays. You always want to give yourself more time than you think. It's going to take longer than you plan. Kind of like GMAT, it's probably going to take you more time than you thought. So I would definitely get started on those. I always suggest doing it one school at a time, at least for the first few. So write your, Harvard essay, then write your Stanford essay, then write your Chicago Booth essay, then write your London Business School essay. And then, after you've written 4 or 5, you can maybe kind of work on a couple simultaneously. You've got a lot of stories, you've got the hang of it. You've got a lot of content that you can repurpose. But in general, it's mostly helpful to write one at a time, because then you can totally focus on that, and then you can have that really nice, refined, finalized content to then use for the next school. So for example, a lot of schools ask you to write a goals essay. So a lot of times that follows the structure of setting up some examples from your career so far, then presenting your goals and why you want to pursue those goals, and then talking about the school, how the school is going to help you reach those goals. So, I want to go into fintech and I need to improve my leadership, and, there's these different offerings and this school offers that. Of course, how that school is going to help you is going to change, but that setup, it can be pretty similar from school to school. Your goals are probably going to remain the same from application to application. So once you have a finalized goal essay, then utilize that for the next school and just change the pieces that need to be adapted, rather than writing, 3 different versions of a goals essay and not really knowing which one you should be working on, or, should I change this and then change that? It can be a lot more time consuming and confusing. So work smart. I would also work on your CV. Of course, whenever you have a few moments to do that. The great thing is, to write an essay, you really kind of need to sit down and focus and think about stories and outline. A CV, not so much. A CV, you can write a bullet point, come back to it, write a bullet point, come back to it. Maybe reformat a section, come back to it. So it's something that you can do kind of in bits and pieces. So make sure that you're working on that here and there. A lot of people, though, leave their CV to the end. They don't always double check it for formatting or spelling or dates. A lot of times they realize only later that they've submitted a CV with incorrect dates. So work on it, make sure that you're not leaving it all for the end. And if you need to retake your tests, use kind of the next month to do that. You can take most of the tests every 16 days. And so if you do need to take another attempt, plan that into your schedule as well. Most people take the test more than once. So if you're in that group, it's totally fine. You're not going to look bad. As long as you submit with a high score, or a high score for your pool and your schools, you're in good shape. And then in December, you want to follow up with your recommenders. Hopefully, ideally, they've already submitted it. But if they haven't, keeping that kind of holiday season in mind, make sure that you're following up with them and getting that submitted. See if they need any help. Did they maybe do you want them to resend the links, send a reminder in the application. Do they maybe need you to send your CV again? So just follow up with them and try to make sure that they submit those. I'd finish your essays and make sure that you have some time to get feedback. A lot of times, people that from the schools can share additional information. Students can give their feedback. Of course, we work with a lot of people who'd like a second opinion on their essays or want to just give it kind of that extra boost. So that can be a great place to kind of get some extra support as well. And make sure that you do that, more than a few days before the deadlines so that you're not in a position to, get great feedback and not have time to implement it. So I would suggest, by mid-December, maybe the third week of December, trying to finish those so that you can just kind of start to fine tune. And then finally, if you need to retake any tests one more time, wrap it up in mid to late December. And then in January, if you have any last minute adjustments to essays, you can make those. I wouldn't suggest rewriting your essays at the last minute or kind of panicking and saying, oh, I hate my Harvard essay, I'm going to redo the whole thing. You've worked really hard, you've been strategic, unless you receive a lot of feedback saying this just really doesn't quite cut it. Just make some adjustments, and hopefully you would have gotten that feedback earlier. So, just making small adjustments as needed. Make sure that you fill out the online forms, making sure that the data is accurate. There's a lot of small spaces for you to add additional information, additional stories. You want to be thoughtful there as well. Business schools don't add those text boxes just for fun. They add them because they're important things that they want to get to know about you, and they read them. Adds hours and hours and hours of work. So if they weren't interested, they would just get rid of it. MIT, for example, has a very streamlined application form. So does Columbia, whereas Stanford and Harvard have a much more extensive application. So it's there because they want to read it. So be thoughtful, making sure that you use those spaces to add value. If you're doing it last minute, you won't be able to do that. Make sure that you submit plenty of time before the deadline. I'm a big fan of at least a week before, just because, there can be system problems. Maybe your internet goes out. Maybe your bank thinks that trying to submit so many payments all at once is fraud, and they block your card, and it takes longer to get it unblocked than you would hope. So by doing all of these things before the deadline as much as possible, you can avoid some of those issues. And then for certain schools, you also need to be mindful of completing video essays. So INSEAD requires one, Kellogg requires one, Yale requires one, Oxford requires one. There's other schools as well, but those come to mind right off the bat. LBS does too, but only later when you interview. So make sure that you're aware of those deadlines and make sure that you are prepared to record those video essays. Again, it's a lot of work for them to review those. So they want to see thoughtful answers. They are paying attention to those. Schools like INSEAD, for example, it's due the same day as the deadline. Other schools like Kellogg give you 96 hours. So just make sure that you don't have a lot of time to submit those. So you want to give yourself time to do that as well and to practice. So that brings you through to the admissions process. So I think now we will turn things over to questions and answers. But quickly before we do that, I do want to mention that if you're looking for any sample essays, brainstorm guides, we have an exercise that walks you through how to build your personal brand, how to develop your goals, how to show that how you can contribute to the school. We have our resource center, so it has a lot of resources that we've developed to help clients secure spots in their top choice programs. All of the essays there are from people who have gotten into those schools, so you can see what has worked in the past and then use it to help you develop your own successful application. So if you want to scan the QR code, it'll provide you with more information. So Nelly, I guess let's start answering questions.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Indeed, we have a few questions in the chat box, and I'll start with a question that we actually get a lot. It's someone asking, is it true the scholarships are given to the people who apply first? We heard this question a lot. I think people are worried that if they wait for the second or third round, the scholarships will be already awarded. Is this true, or how does it work?
So for the third round, yeah, it's going to be tough. By the third round, there's not a lot of scholarships available. The majority of those are given out in the first and second round. They know that the majority of applicants apply in the second round. So most people are ready for round two. Fewer applicants come in round one. So while there are, a lot of scholarships available for both rounds, they do give some out in round one. So as a percentage of total applicants, there are fewer available, but there's still a lot of scholarships on the table. So it's not, oh, I should wait until round one because there won't be any scholarships. No, there's still plenty of scholarships. Every year we see our candidates being rewarded or awarded a lot of scholarship money in round two. In certain cases, there are very specific named scholarships that are only available in round one. So, a dean's scholarship or something like that. But those are very small number of scholarships that are only available in round one. So no, there's still a lot of opportunities in round two.
This is very encouraging to hear, and I guess the most important thing is to prepare a good application before thinking about the scholarships.
Exactly. Or a good application, show them, that you're really excited about the school, give a good interview, and there's still great scholarships out there. If it comes down to round three and a scholarship is really important, be prepared that might not work out so well in your favor.
Okay. Can you give advice for those of us who will reapply at the same programs once we have been rejected? Okay, this is someone who is going to apply again after being rejected once.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually work with a lot of reapplicants who come to us every year kind of with the same question. The biggest thing that you want to think about is kind of the delta. So what are the main things that you have improved and the main things that you've changed since last year? So that's something that they really want to see, that you've been able to improve overall and improve what you bring. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. Number one is, was your GMAT or GRE maybe a little bit low? If it was, then, try to retake the GMAT or GRE and get a higher score. Or maybe you took the GMAT and it wasn't an easy test for you. Try the GRE, take a test to see what you can do. Second, look at other areas of your application that might have been weak. So maybe you didn't present very clear goals. That's something that we see a lot. Or maybe your goals weren't very realistic. Maybe they didn't really have a lot to do with what you're doing now. So, for example, breaking into healthcare can be notoriously difficult. So if you've never done anything with healthcare, you just think it's interesting, that might not be the best, or most convincing story. So you might want to reflect a little bit on why you want to do healthcare. How did you present that goal? Is that really the goal that you think is the best one for you? Not saying that you should change your application just to say what the admissions committee wants to hear. Of course, it should be genuine, but really thinking, did my goals make sense? Are they realistic? Thinking about continuing to demonstrate leadership, promotions, things like that can be very helpful, as well as additional involvement in your community. Maybe you got involved in a diversity program at work. Maybe you started mentoring people, teaching English in the community, something like that. That's something that's great to show as well. And then for schools that you have already applied for, it's great to show additional involvement with that school. So that you've talked to new people, that you've maybe attended campus or visited campus if it's possible. It's been a weird year for that, so it still might not be possible. That you've attended webinars. So you really want to show them that you're still very engaged in the school. You've really gone, above and beyond to understand how the school can help you reach your goals, and that you show that in your reapplicant essays. I'm going to leave the link in the chat to our resource center. We have a lot of sample reapplicant essays there. So that can also be something that you take a look at, how people structured that. I think we have like 20 or something in there. I'm not sure exactly now how many it is, but it's also important in the essay to have that really good structure of how you've improved, any reflections on things that maybe you need to clarify or adjust, and then also showing about ways that you continue to engage with the school and how that makes you kind of more convinced than ever that it's the right program for you.
Thank you very much for this very useful answer and for all your tips. We have one more question, and now is the time to invite everyone who is listening to use the chat if they have more questions. Okay, so what is the most important factor to consider when I choose a school if the programs are similar? Can you give any tips?
Yeah, so a lot of people, when we start this process, they say, all the schools are the same. The only thing that changes is the name and the location. Yes, I mean, at very top level, that can seem true that, oh, they all say that they're a very close community and then they're going to help me get the job of my dreams and make more money. And that they have an amazing curriculum. And yes, I mean, that is kind of what everyone's going to say at a very top level. At a very top level message. But if you really get down into it, you can see a lot of different things to look at. I would say number one is location. So if the programs are similar, in general, location can still play a factor. So thinking about schools that are really good at finance, a lot of times Wharton and Columbia come to mind. Is it advantageous for you to be in New York, or is Philadelphia kind of an okay location for you? If you're really set on moving to New York, establishing yourself in New York, you want to build that network with New York firms, Columbia might be a better choice, even though they both have great finance programs. If you're looking at finance, but not necessarily, I want to work on Wall Street, then, Morgan can still help you work on Wall Street, but then, potentially location is not quite as important. Other things that you can look at is the class size. So again, kind of looking at Wharton and Columbia. Wharton's class size is significantly larger than Columbia. So that's going to mean that you have kind of a different interaction with people, but also different level of resources, right? If you have 1,000 students, you're going to have a little bit more diversity in terms of classes and clubs and organizations than if you have 300. You just don't need as many professors for 300 students as you do for 1,000. So thinking about kind of that experience. Another thing is campus culture. So do you want a school that has a really close, tight-knit campus experience? So, for example, Kellogg has that really close-knit campus community culture, whereas NYU, for example, is very much a city campus. So people come in, take their classes, network, attend club meetings, and then kind of go out to their homes. Nobody lives on campus, right? NYU is very much a city school. So if you want to have the campus experience, NYU might not be the best choice. If it's not important to you, then it might be a great option. Other things to think about, I would say, is if you're not an American student, what does the alumni network look like in your area? So thinking about the fact that if you're planning to use that alumni network to come home and get jobs, does one school have a stronger presence in your country than the other? Because that's going to ultimately kind of expand the net of jobs that you can get. And, is it kind of concentrated on a specific area? So, Chicago Booth is a great school for finance, but in my area, everyone who went to Booth went into consulting. So I don't really want to go into consulting, so I'm not sure if that's a great fit. I love INSEAD and London Business School, but where I live, INSEAD has a much bigger network than London Business School or vice versa. So that's important to consider as well. And then finally, I would say scholarships. So if it comes down to looking at, scholarships are really important for me. It's something that if I don't get a scholarship, I might not be able to go. Looking at their scholarship awards, some schools are more generous than others. Some schools have more to give than others. And so looking at that and saying, maybe one school is easier for you to fund your program than the other.
Thank you very much, Ellin. This was a very exhaustive answer. I think we managed to help the person who was asking the question and maybe many more. We don't have any more questions in the chat, so I'm giving the word to you for any final advice, your best advice you have.
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody that came. I hope that the tips that I shared were helpful. Thank you, Nelly, for hosting me. It's always fun to do this with you. And I'd say any kind of final tips, I really can't stress enough to work ahead. I always say, applying for an MBA is like a part-time job. If you think it's going to take 5 hours, give yourself 10, because it's probably going to take 10. So give yourself more time than you think you need. You'll be happy that you did later, and just be realistic with your workload. I don't think you're going to be able to apply to 10 schools in the next 8 weeks and do a good job. So really be realistic, plan ahead as much as possible, and don't leave everything for the last minute. We can tell when we read essays that were written last minute. It's pretty obvious. Every once in a while, somebody does a really good job of hiding it, but generally we can tell when something was put together in a rush. And generally those applicants are the ones that contacted me last year saying, hey, I applied, I didn't get in. Can you help me reapply? So, do yourself a favor. You're already here, which is fantastic. So keep working ahead. Keep just doing a little bit every day to get yourself closer and closer to the deadlines.
Thank you very much, Ellin. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We wish you best of luck in your academic journey. Bye-bye, everyone.